Oh boy, it's that time again. Another top 5 list featuring trains. Haven't done one of these in a while. Felt like doing it. And today, we have, a bit of a specific one that has some rules. This is a top 5 list of one-of-a-kind locomotives or trains, depending on the model. There's a mix and match in here that still exist, that survived into preservation. Now, you might be saying, oh, well, that's pretty easy. Wrong. It is not that easy for 2 reasons. A, I am not counting those that became one of a kind because the rest of their sisters were murdered. For example, 611 is one of a kind in the modern day, but she didn't start out that way. She had a bunch of siblings, but they've all been scrapped. Same thing can be said for 4449. I don't count these 2 for this list because they weren't built as one-of-a-kind models. They are now, because they're the only ones left, but they weren't that way initially. This list will consist of locomotives that have never had any sisters, ever, from the beginning till the current moment in time, okay? And the other reason this list was a bit more difficult than most to put together is because that's actually pretty hard to do, because it's actually pretty hard to find examples under that criteria, because for one thing, usually when locomotives are built, they wind up with at least one other sibling, generally even more. And as they are a single example, they're usually some weird experiment that doesn't wind up in preservation. Even if they serve for a length of time, they aren't seen as worth preserving because the model wasn't seen that often because there was only one. Granted, that does intrinsically somewhat make them more valuable, depending on what we're talking about here, but my point is, chances are generally greater that at least one particular model of any kind of vehicle would be preserved if there's more than one example in existence when they get retired, you know? With one-of-a-kinds, it's a bit more difficult because if that one goes, then it's gone. So yeah, this was a bit trying, but there are actually more examples of that happening than you'd think, and we're going to talk about 5 of them today. This is 5 one-of-a-kind trains that did survive into preservation. The New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, number 999, or 999. Call now, only $9.99, have your credit card ready. This locomotive was constructed all the way back in 1893, so, yes, she is still around and over 100 years old. Actually, over 120 years old. She is old, but she still exists and is a classic type of steam locomotive, a 440 American. That wheel arrangement saw great success, especially in the late 1800s, but started being replaced into the 1900s with 10-wheelers and other larger designs like Atlantics and Pacifics. And 999's overall design is a bit more modern in terms of her boiler, her funnel, and pretty much everything else besides the wheel arrangement. And I'm sort of cheating including her because she kinda had siblings, but not really. Let me explain. Back in 1892, New York Central's general passenger agent, named George Henry Daniels, was looking to do something impressive. He wanted to create a brand new, really fast locomotive that could publicize the Empire State Express at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, scheduled for 1893. The idea was to use technology they had at the time in order to make this engine run as fast as possible. And it was decided to go with an American because New York Central's chief superintendent of motive power and rolling stock, William Buchanan, had already designed a class of American-type locomotives known as the Class I's, that were, in and of themselves, very fast, and they could switch that design up a bit to make them even faster if they so chose. So, technically, 999 does have sisters in the form of the Class I's, but she's a very unique beast. She's not like the others. She was designed a little bit differently. She was constructed at New York Central's West Albany shops, and was ready just in time for the exposition. Unlike the Class I's, 999 was given 86.5-inch drivers. The Class I's only had 70-inch drivers. And 999's brakes were mounted on her pilot truck, which was a more modern idea. She was also very pretty, meant to be. Her band's pipes and trim were all very polished, and the rest of her was given her satin finish in black, with the name Empire State Express applied to the sides of her tender. As a result, both aesthetically and functionally, she was much different than her half-sisters. Mostly because of those blasted drivers. They did allow her to go really fast. And some sources suggest that she was the first steam locomotive in the world to travel over 100 miles per hour. Some sources say she got as high as 112.5 miles an hour, though that one is dubious and it's probably not true. But it's believed she definitely did hit 100 at least one point. Whether she was first is still debated, but she did get that fast. So that was an impressive display either way. She was an impressive attraction at the World's Fair, but she continued serving after that because she was a perfectly good locomotive. She pulled the Empire State Express between Buffalo and Syracuse until 1899, when she was replaced and sent to different parts of the system for other uses, though she was never particularly top tier at anything other than going fast. The reason for this is that she was an American, and Americans only had 2 sets of driving wheels, total of 4. The trains were getting longer and heavier, and she had a habit of slipping. Interestingly, she was technically modified into a Class I. Yeah, her drivers were replaced with the same size as the I's used, making her nearly identical to them. And that was because it was more intrinsic that she not slip rather than just going fast. And with the smaller drivers, that did help her adhesion a bit, so she was able to get away with it. In the 1920s, she received a brand new boiler and a new tender, and worked local and branch lines until 1924, when she was yet again restored to her original glory for another exhibition at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's Fair of the Iron Horse in 1925. Despite becoming obsolete compared to other steam engines, and especially when diesels showed up, 999 stayed around. She put on display at various exhibitions, including the 1948-49 Chicago Railroad Fair, but eventually she'd be retired from service in May of 1952. By that point, she wasn't even pulling mainline trains anymore, only performing yard-switching duties in western New York. And she sat around for about a decade, while all around her, well, she was on New York Central, and most of the other steam engines were scrapped. Nearly all of them. But 999 slipped through the cracks because of her fame, and the fact that she had been on so many exhibitions. It was decided she would be held for preservation, and she was donated to the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry in 1962. Boys, where on earth is 999? I was saving her for last as a form of mercy, but if you think for one solitary second that I am gonna let any steam engines escape my chainsaw, you've got another thing coming. Boss? You signed the paper allowing her to be donated to the museum in Chicago. You don't remember that? What? Yeah, we were pretty confused about it too, but I'm gonna be honest with you, we just didn't feel the need to question it. I must have missed something on the paper. I thought that was the one to allow her to be scrapped. No, that was the one to let her be donated to the museum, so she'd be safe forever. No! Yeah, I kind of saw that one coming. As if he ever reacts any other way. Despite being safe at a museum, 999 had a bit of a rough go at preservation at first because she was stored outside. She started suffering the wear and tear of rain, for example, but in 1993, the museum would conduct a major restoration of her and bring her inside to their main hall, where she still sits today, safe. Although it is worth mentioning, she doesn't have her 86-inch drivers on. They gave her the 70-inch ones, which, to be fair, are the ones she used the most when she was actually in service. But yeah, that means she's just a class I. So I told you I was kind of cheating with her, but fight me. How about that? The GMD-H3. Oh. Guys! Look at the baby! It's a baby. It's a little baby Diesel. Look at her. Tell her she's cute. You tell her she's cute right now! This little baby is a diesel hydraulic switching locomotive, an experimental one, constructed in January of 1960 by General Motors Diesel of Canada. She never had any siblings whatsoever. Not because she didn't work. She did. Though the diesel hydraulic thing was very experimental for General Motors, and despite the fact that she was demonstrated on multiple different railways, and even spent some time over in Egypt, once again for demonstration purposes, she was fine, but never generated any interest. No one purchased her. At all. So, that was the reason she stayed a unique experiment. There was no reason to make any more if no one wanted them. Which is sad, because again, she worked just fine. It was probably more that she was diesel hydraulic, and most railroads were more interested in diesel electric. She also was not powerful at all. She was a very, very tiny yard-switching diesel, only generating 275 horsepower. But for small industrial applications, it was still very useful, and she was sold in 1963 to McKinnon Industries of St. Catharines, Ontario, who wanted her to be their plant switcher. She was numbered 2128. They loved her. She did her job, and did it well, staying there for 30 years, plucking around the plant, moving stuff, being a good little diesel, and a baby. But in 1992, she was sold again to the South Simcoe Railway, which was a heritage museum railway located in Tottenham, Ontario. You'd think she'd be safe there, but not really. Sort of, kind of. See, what happened was the museum's directors declared her surplus to their requirements in 1995. They already had enough tiny diesels around. They just didn't need her. They didn't want to necessarily scrap her because they knew she was unique, but they also didn't want to keep her. Fortunately, after a fundraising effort, the Southern Michigan Railroad Society got a hold of her in 1996 and began to use her once again for their own operations. They used her for about another 10 years or so, until finally they had to put her off to the siding because she needed some pretty major repairs. She's been sitting since then, and though given a new paint job, hasn't moved under her own power in a long time because she still needs those repairs. They're waiting to get enough money to actually do the work. But I doubt she's going anywhere. Again, they know she's one of a kind, so scrapping her is likely out of the question. And she's not like beyond repair or anything. She just needs the work done and they can't afford to do it right now. Happens sometimes, but at least she's in a place where she's likely looked after. The Flying Yankee! The what? That's what it was called. The Flying Yankee. This is a diesel-electric streamliner constructed in 1935 for the Boston and Maine Railroad by Budd Company, utilizing both mechanical and electrical equipment from EMC, eventually known as EMD. The Yankee was one of a kind, but not the first streamliner in America. She was the third, and originally the name Flying Yankee referred specifically to a passenger train that ran between Bangor, Maine and Boston, Massachusetts. But the Flying Yankee was meant to be modern, sleek, futuristic, streamlined, and it was a lightweight construction with welded stainless steel put together with Budd's patented process, resulting in a very unique and, again, sleek appearance. The set utilized an 8-cylinder Winton 201A diesel engine that drove a generator, which then drove the traction motors, diesel electric, and internally had a lot of modern features for comfort, such as air conditioning, which is nice. She didn't have a proper dining car, but meals were prepared in a galley and served directly to passengers in trays that clipped to the back of the seat in front of them. I guess it's kind of like tray tables that come down on most modern trains today, or planes for that matter. And while considered a separate beast, the Flying Yankee had a lot, and I mean a lot, in common with Bud's earlier Pioneer Zephyr, built for the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad. A lot of railroad historians actually consider them sisters because they were practically identical in most ways, except that Yankee didn't offer baggage or mail space, so she could carry more passengers. Apparently that was enough of a difference to consider her a separate thing, so I'm gonna go with that, but I just want to acknowledge that she kind of does have a sister in a way. So again, maybe I'm cheating here. I don't know. You tell me in the comments, because you're gonna yell at me anyway, because you do all the time. I'm sure I mispronounced something by now, and someone's gonna be like, actually, that name is pronounced. You know what? I get it. You're so smart. You're smarter than everybody else in the room. You're gonna go far, kid, and that's wonderful. Also, I don't care. Yankee was delivered in February of 1935 and toured the BM-MEC railroad system before she entered service on April Fool's Day. Seriously, April 1st. That's when she started working. Go figure. But it was no joke. She did well, working for 6 days out of the week on a route that took her 750 miles. She and her crew were given Sundays off to do routine maintenance to keep her working, and she was considered a huge success, and was a profitable venture, all things considered. Technically, she was renamed a few times. While most always call her Yankee, when she switched routes, they changed her name to go along with the route, such as Cheshire, Minuteman, Mountaineer, and Businessman. She was retired under the name the Minuteman in the 1950s, and that was for 2 reasons. A, she was getting old, which, yeah, she was over 20, pretty old for a train set, and ridership was declining. Passenger trains in general in America were having trouble competing. Long distance, planes were getting more popular because they were just faster, and for short distance, a lot of people had personal cars. So ridership declined heavily, and unfortunately, many passenger routes were canceled altogether. Although it is worth mentioning that her old route is still currently operated by Amtrak's Downeaster. And because she's on the list, it should be mentioned she wasn't scrapped. Because of her unique nature and success, instead of being destroyed, she was donated to the Edaville Railroad Tourist Museum operation, located in Carver, Massachusetts, in 1957. She wasn't utilized by them at all, though. She was on static display until 1993, when she was moved to Glen, New Hampshire, after being purchased by a man named Bob Morrill, who was the owner of a place called Storyland, a fairy tale theme park. In 1997, she was moved again to the Concord and Claremont Railroad shops in Claremont, New Hampshire, for a restoration after she was purchased again by the state of New Hampshire. And she was wearing down, having been kept outdoors pretty much all this time. And by 2004, a major structural restoration was finished on her, and the plan was to actually restore her to operation, believe it or not. But she was moved again on August 10, 2005 to the Hobo Railroad in Lincoln, New Hampshire. They were gonna move her, yet again, to Concord, New Hampshire, which was the site of a former Boston and Maine rail yard, but plans for that were canceled in 2017, and the New Hampshire state government's plans to actually restore her to operation were never actually completed. They put her up for sale in 2023, but stressed that they were only interested in selling her to someone who wasn't, gonna destroy her. Like, they couldn't justify finishing her themselves, but they also didn't want to just have her scrapped. So, hey, we'll take it. And in April of 2024, she was sold to the Flying Yankee Association, who, as the name implies, are looking to restore and operate her in the Mount Washington Valley. They also entertained the possibility of running her on the Conway Scenic Railway, which might be nice too. She's actually at Conway at the moment. Moved there on July 30th, 2024, where her restoration is continuing. So this is one unique preserved design that might actually run again, and that's pretty friggin' cool, not gonna lie. But only time will tell. Canadian Pacific 7000. Ooh, it's a diesel, a switcher, and it's Canadian, sort of. Let me explain. This is a diesel electric, but obviously a single switcher, and yes, she is completely unique. Never had any siblings, and she was built under really weird circumstances, and that's part of the reason why she's unique. See, she was ordered through Stone Franklin of Canada Limited, located in Montreal, and then built by National Steel Car, located in Hamilton, Ontario in 1937. Only a single example of her was constructed for the Canadian Pacific Railway, and the whole point of her design was to avoid customs. See, while they could import a lot of diesels from, say, America, it would be much cheaper to get those parts from the British Empire. Yes, they used British diesel components in the 1930s. Uh-oh. That sounds like a questionable decision, but to be fair, it actually worked okay. She used a Harlem and Wolff prime mover, which was a 6-cylinder, 600 horsepower diesel engine, and the electrical equipment came from Lawrence Scott and Electro Motors of Norwich, England. The Canadians put her together really well, utilizing all these new components, resulting in a unique beast that functioned. She wasn't the most powerful diesel around, only 550 horsepower, only able to go 30 miles per hour, but she was a yard switcher. That's all she needed to do, and she did it. They never gave her any sisters, but she plucked around for Canadian Pacific for quite some time. Canadian Pacific got rid of her in 1943. She was replaced by Alco S2s at that time, and then leased to Marathon Paper Mills Limited, where she worked for a little over 3 months before the mill just outright bought her in 1944. In 1951, she was actually re-engined, no longer using that Harlem and Wolff one. They gave her a 600 horsepower Caterpillar diesel engine, which normally I am super against putting any Caterpillar diesel engines in railroad rolling stock because it seems like they always have problems in that context. Caterpillar engines are good for, like, construction equipment, not for locomotives, just because of the nature of the business. But in her case, she actually got away with it, and I think that's because she was never moving very fast. She was a yard switcher, remember, mostly moving between 10 and 20 miles per hour. So I think because of her unique situation, she got away with utilizing a Caterpillar design, because she lasted another 13 years like that, finally being retired in 1964 from the paper mill, who decided not to scrap her. Knowing she was a unique piece, she was offered to the Canadian Railway Museum in 1965, who graciously accepted her. She's still there now, on indoor static display. Doubt she'll ever run again, but it's nice to see this oddly distinctive mad science experiment by the Canadians to just try to get around customs and avoid paying too much for import duties got saved because she worked out. Santa Fe 5000, or Madam Queen. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, Darkness, did you seriously make this entire list just as an excuse to talk about Madam Queen again? And yes, I did! Fire up Madam Queen, you cowards! I have a whole t-shirt about this! Okay, sorry, let me back up a little bit. The Santa Fe 5000 is a 210-4 Texas-type steam locomotive constructed by Baldwin in 1930 for the Santa Fe Railway. Numbered 5000, she was almost instantly called Madam Queen, and the reason for her existence was that Santa Fe was looking to upgrade their fleet with these new superpower designs, the ones with an extra trailing wheel, in order to have those big old fireboxes. The Texas type is basically just a Berkshire, but with an extra set of drivers, and if built right, can result in better tractive effort for freight operations. And believe me, that did work with Madam Queen. She was to serve as the prototype for all further Texas types that were to be used by Santa Fe after they made sure that her particular quirks were worked out. But she didn't really have any quirks in the technical sense. Frankly, the crews adored her because her pulling power was unreal for an engine with only a single set of drivers. Madam Queen is, quite literally, the most powerful steam locomotive ever built by tractive effort with a single set of drivers. Now, obviously, those with multiple sets of drivers, like, say, big boys, for example, or other simple articulates, are going to have better pulling power than her, but in terms of locomotives with just one set of drivers, she's the strongest one. So to say that Santa Fe was happy with her would be a massive understatement. She could pull 15% more tonnage in 9% less time, while burning 17% less coal per 1,000 gross ton miles, when compared to the two 10-2s. She was phenomenal, and that's what earned her the name Madam Queen. But the design was never repeated. She was a lone example in her own class. Why? If she was so good, what happened? Well, the Great Depression happened, actually. Santa Fe knew they had to be careful because everyone was poor. The economy was in the dirt, and a lot of the railroads were suffering as a result, including them, so they decided to avoid capital expenditures until the situation improved. By the time they were in a safe enough position to start ordering more text types, the technology had shifted a bit, and there were some refinements in these new Texases. Namely, they were faster than Madam Queen. They had a better top speed. But they were never as powerful as her in terms of pulling. They were always a little bit weaker in that regard. That was kind of the trade-off. While they were faster and could get the freight trains there a bit quicker, they couldn't pull as much as she could. One of those things. And as a result, she remained distinctive. They never repeated her design because these new Texases were just fine. And then after World War II, well, things started being dieselized, so you can kind of see how that was going. Madam Queen remained mostly unchanged during her career, though. She did receive a larger tender for improved range, but that required her cab roof to be slightly modified, and in 1940 she'd be converted from coal burning to oil burning. So that was nice. And Santa Fe never stopped acknowledging the fact that Madam Queen was frankly awesome, to the point that she was slated for preservation by them themselves. They were like, yeah, no, we're not scrapping that one. That one's awesome. And thus, on April 17th, 1957, after being in storage for several years at that point, and traveling 1,750,000 miles during her career, she was donated to the city of Amarillo, Texas, placed on outdoor static display at the Santa Fe station. Eventually, in 2005, she'd be moved by the Railroad Artifact Preservation Society to a new location still in Amarillo, at 500 Southeast 2nd Avenue, where originally there were plans to build a protective cover over her, which never seemed to came to be. She's still sitting outside, right now. In 2016, the city proposed selling her, but that didn't happen either. She's still there, sitting, chilling, hanging out. And I just need to remind you all, in case you missed it, in case anyone wasn't paying attention, she is the most powerful steam locomotive ever constructed by tractive effort with a single set of drivers in history, ever. And she's just sitting there. Amarillo, guys, hear me out on this. Fire up Madam Queen, you coward! Or at least give her to somebody who will. And I understand that doing that would be expensive, and she's been outside a while, and her internals are a mystery. I don't care. That's one of my favorite steam engines ever. Right there. Just chilling. Hanging out. Vibing in the elements. And believe me, if I actually had the funds in order to accomplish such a task, I would make an offer myself. Unfortunately, I don't. I don't. Y'all think I make a lot of money here. I make enough to get by. But not extra. I ain't some magical millions of views influencer who just walks around in California and films people for chuckles. Listen, I talk about trains. There's only so many views to go around in this department. But my point is, somebody, please. She's the queen. We gotta do something. You have to do something. You people have to do anything. I made a t-shirt. Please? Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.